Hello everyone, I'm Flavio Marroquin and today I will be presenting chapter 6 of the Anarchic Structures and the Balances of Power by Kenneth Waltz. Here's a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was the anarchic structures. So in chapter 6, Kenneth Waltz does a deep dive into one task, which is to examine the characteristics of anarchy and the expectations about outcomes of anarchic realms. So the characteristics of anarchy and the expectations about outcomes associated with anarchic realms. It's best examined through the comparisons between behavior and outcomes in anarchic and hierarchic realms. So the five characteristics include violence at home and abroad, interdependence and integration, structures and strategies, the value of anarchy, and the anarchy and hierarchy. Uh, so this characteristic, violence at home and abroad, states that states maintain a state of readiness to be ready if and when neighboring states act with violence. The threat of violence and the recurrent use of force are associated with international affairs rather than national affairs. However, Waltz goes on to bring up a good point that some of the most destructive wars, since at least the Napoleon era, have actually been more destructive at the national level internally, as opposed to state against state type of warfare. So some examples include the China's Taiping Rebellion, the American Civil War, Stalin's Purge, and Hitler's extermination during World War II. I mean, just these examples alone account for over 31 million deaths. And continuing on, Waltz argues that the difference between national and international politics lies not in the use of force, but in the way governments employ organizations to react to force. The effective governments can control the use of force by having a monopoly. For example, governments leverage public agents to prevent and counter the private use of force, which means citizens don't have to do it themselves. So when I think about this, I think of public agents. I'm assuming Watts is referring to a form of law enforcement. Interdependence and integration. Interdependence describes the condition one nation has with other nations. Integration focuses within a nation that draws parts of a nation closely together, which leads to specialization, which is a system of divided labor that works to everyone's advantage to further develop societies. When states are free to specialize, they are free to do so because competition of specialization ensues, which leads to manufacturing of goods. So in anarchic realms, similar units work together, whereas in hierarchic realms, unlike units would have to work together. So it looks like specialization thrives more on anarchic realms. Structures and strategies. Tasks are to be accomplished by states, especially major ones, which are postured and structured to have an effective impact internationally. They tend to act in the best interest of their own state. And then Watts also goes on to mention macro theory, which is a theory about the national economy built on supply, income, and demand. And macro theories show how aggregators are interconnected and indicates how changes in one or some of them affect others and the performance of the economy. A macro theory of international politics would show how the international system is moved by system-wide aggregates. The virtue of anarchy. In conditions of anarchy, self-help is necessary to the principle of action in an anarchic order. It is used to achieve a unit's objective and maintain security. Units can vary from people, corporations, states, and so on. It brings forth a situation with high risk, whether it be economically or for war. purposes. States in anarchy often enact agencies to mitigate risk. These agencies are granted effective authority to extend a system of rules. Waltz goes on to state that units in an anarchic order act for their own sake and not for the sake of preserving an organization and furthering their fortunes within it. Force is used in the best interest of oneself rather than the organizations. States like people are insecure about their freedom, which leads to the need for accepting insecurity. In anarchy, similar units under determination with the same capability make up their own realm of politics and power without the need for an administration or an authority to guide them. In contrast, hierarchies is made up of a full spectrum of functions of politics and power with an administration or an authority guiding them. Hierarchic elements within international structures limit and restrain the ability to proactive sovereignty to what has been conditioned by higher anarchic echelons. So, analyzing the anarchic structures, just from reading this chapter, these are some of the strengths and weaknesses that I was able to come up with. So, some of the weaknesses include the most damage is done internally within a state. Um, as mentioned before, since the Napoleon era, a lot of examples of it have been, um, it's caused a lot of deaths. I think over 31 million deaths just on the examples that were mentioned. Governments ineffectively employ organizations during use of force. Also leads to insecurity at the state level, and anarchic structures are usually open to violence. Some of the strengths include similar units working together to specialize. Self-help can thrive if the states take initiative. Uh, and in an anarchic structure, freedom is a thing if they are able to fend for themselves. Otherwise, it's not a good thing for them. And quickly talking about realpolitik, which Watts mentions in this chapter, it's a political rubric. It is driven by two elements: interest and the necessity, which are key concepts of realpolitik. It indicates the methods by which foreign policy is conducted and provides a rationale for them. Structural constraints explain why the methods are repeatedly used despite differences in the persons and states who use them. Balance of power theory explains the results that such methods produce. So, in other words, real politics is based on practical objectives rather than ideals. It pretty much suggests a no nonsense view and a disregard for ethical considerations. So, in diplomacy, it is often associated with relentless and realistic pursuit of national interests. A state can take action in the international forum if the benefits are greater than the cost. Sometimes even at the cost of neglecting human rights. Now, moving on to balance of power. So, balance of power is a theory where states may secure their survival while preventing any one state from gaining enough power to the rest of the states. Opinions on it include guaranteeing world peace, a law of nature, an outrage, and some view it as a method to disguise imperialist policies. It's often misunderstood without understanding the three characteristics of theory. And the three characteristics are: a theory contains at least one theoretical assumption, which is not facts. Theory must be evaluated in terms of what they claim to explain, such as the results of actions under given conditions. And a general explanatory system cannot account for specifics. So, a balance of power theory is properly viewed by first beginning with assumptions about the states who seek their own preservation and at most aim for domination. Waltz argues that there is a misconception of balance of power requiring three or more players when it comes to balance of power. He uses a two political power system as an example as the balance of power continues. In a self-help system where one has power and the other does not, leads to the weaker one to be motivated to reach for the resources they need to best serve their own interests. A self-help system is one in which those who do not help themselves or who do it less effectively than others will fail to prosper, which it opens them up to danger. And now analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of balance of power, starting off with the weaknesses, which include time balance of power and how it directly aligns to realism is difficult. Balance of power assumptions are erroneous. And then what states can do to balance power are limited. If I recall, I think Waltz mentions that the way states can gather power or increase their power would be through military, economy, and or building alliances. So really three that I can think of. And then the other weakness would be difficult to measure the power. Moving on to the strengths, validation of a state's power is can be validated. Balance of power is formed by some or all states consciously aiming to maintain balance or seeking universal domination. And then, so if a balance of power is to be maintained, the policies of states must aim to uphold it. If it's maintained, it can be concluded that their aim was accurate. If a balance of power is not produced, we can say that the theory's assumptions are erroneous. And then moving on to self-help, the self-help theory to preserve a balance of power in a system, just like anarchic realms, is that's a strength in my opinion. And now some questions for the class. Why does specialization thrive in an anarchic structure and not in hierarchic structures? And then question two, can countries who have less resources benefit from the balance of power theory? And thanks, that's all I have.